Well, we got the folks all scattered after they wanted to stay and build a tower in a city, and then we moved on, and we get another list of people, but in Genesis 11, over at let's see. We'll start at 24th verse when we say that when Nahor had lived 29 years, he became the father of Terah. And Nahor lived after the birth of Terah 119 years and had other sons and daughters. And when Terah had lived 70 years, he became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now, these are the descendants of Terah. Terah was the father of Abram, who later gets named Abraham, Nahor and Haran was the father of Lot. Haran died before his father Terah, and he died in the land of his birth, in Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, and she had no child. Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. Now we're looking at going from Ur to the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they stopped and they settled there. And the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Now, all of this up until we get to this family and get Terah and his offspring and Abram and Sarai, we're right at that point of having primeval, general kind of history and vague relations, and kind of saying these are the nations, but they aren't really tied to individuals that we can find evidence of them in other places outside of the Bible. But when we get to these people, these are, we believe, real persons. Now, the stories are not strongly accurate, but these are real people. And at this point, this is the great transition point and one of the most important passages in our scriptures. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house, go from, and then go to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great." Now, making your name great, I'm not going to dwell on this a lot, but that kind of is supposed to hear that familiar phrase, have a great name, make a name for ourselves at the stopping and building a city and a tower, that we want to make a name for ourselves. But here we have making a name. God will be the one who's behind making a name. I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So, and then in verse 4, so Abram went. God says, go. Abram went, as the Lord had told him. And Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed Haran. And he took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the persons whom they had acquired in Haran, and so forth. Now, Rabbi Sachs says that up until now, there have been 4 dramatic acts in Genesis, and we're at this transition point for more development. But he's taking it from a moral development, and he sees the Adam and Eve story, the Cain and Abel story, the Noah and the flood story, and the Tower of Babel story, and each representing a step in maturation process of humanity, an evolution of moral development, as it were. In the Adam and Eve story, Adam and Eve eat the fruit in disobedience, but Adam, when they're encountered about this by God, confronted, Adam blames Eve, not my fault, her fault. Eve blames the snake, not my fault, the snake, and neither accepts responsibility. And Sachs says this is an attitude that's still present in today's world, and it says it originated in the garden, but it's a victim culture, a culture where it's not my fault, I'm the victim. And we'll deal with that later because he does some interesting things with it. But the second is Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel, and God questions him, "Where is your brother?" His blood cries out from the ground. But the question of responsibility, Cain doesn't deny personal responsibility. He doesn't say, "I'm innocent, I did not do it." But he does say that he denies moral responsibility for his brother. I am not my brother's keeper. I'm not responsible for his safety. It's only me that I have to be worried about. And it's kind of, if, kill or be killed. It's just, it's all up to the individual to survive, and irregardless of others. So this moral responsibility he didn't accept. And morality has to do with relationships with others. So then we get Noah is righteous, but he's no hero. He does not try to save humanity. He only saves himself. And he would not claim or assume responsibility for others. And now one cannot be a sole survivor and actually truly survive. So Noah failed the test of collective responsibility, which acknowledges we're in this together. It's not everyone for themselves. We're in this together, this collective responsibility. And then Sachs compares this to developmental theory and the moral development in developmental theory, and looks at a child. The first level, as a child, we do learn that our actions are under our control. We, as about 2 years old, when kids get, they want to push and kind of encounter others. They're learning that what they do affects others. And, little kids, may come run and jump on mommy or daddy, and they go, "Ooh!" Well, that's just part of their learning. What they do affects others. And it's that developmental process that is the beginning of personal responsibility. And secondly, not everything that we can do may we do. Right around 2 years old, little children, they start saying no back to us. Well, it's because we start saying no to them. No, 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 can't do that. So that's the beginning of moral responsibility. Not everything you can do, may you do. So, and then the third responsibility is that it's more than ourselves. We have a duty to be kind to others, to look out for others. Look out for your little sister or your mom or your dad or grandma or other people, your classmates, your school, your neighbors, and so forth. A collective responsibility. Be a good citizen. These are the developmental levels. But the fourth, and this is where Abram crosses over into this, the other hadn't gotten to this level, and he says ultimately morality is built into the structure of existence. That there is an authority beyond not only the individual but humankind, an authority beyond us human beings, and that is our Creator, our Maker, but it's built into us, and we need to respond in some way. And he calls that an ontological responsibility. Now, ontology is a field of physics or philosophy and religion, and it deals with questions and issues of existence, of being. What is it that makes us who we are? How do we know we exist? For example, the philosophical meanderings of how can I know I'm just not in a dream and everything I sense and feel and experience isn't real, doesn't exist, it's just my imagination. You've had dreams that have been really real. I mean, they frighten you. You get a physiological reaction to your nightmare. You wake up sweating. I remember once our brain is supposed to turn off and have our body relax no matter what our head is doing. But I was having a dream once that a dog was coming for me, coming for my face. I mean, just jumping at me. And so I was blocking it and keeping it from grabbing me with its teeth. Well, Karen was right there at the end of my arms. And anyway, you're not supposed to be doing that in your sleep, but anyway, she waked me up and gave me what for hitting her in the face. But how do we know that even though it seems real and we get a physiological reaction to what's in our brain, that our whole life isn't a dream? How do we know? Well, the field of ontology in science and metaphysics deals with that. Have you ever heard Immanuel Kant? But anyway, the expression, I think, therefore I am, that's wrestling with this question. And the way he gets to it, he gets down to the point that even if everything is a dream and an illusion, if I have the mental process of doubting, this is what can I know for sure? This is what philosophy works with. What can we know for sure? Well, what I can know is I doubt everything. I am doubting the reality of everything, and the process of doubting is a mental function that I am performing, and I can know that I am doubting. Even if I doubt that I'm doubting, I'm still doubting. And so, therefore, I'm thinking these doubts. I think, therefore, I am. I know I am. Well, anyway, this is going to the fundamental basics of existence, and that somehow structured in existence, Sachs says, is a moral kind of entity. I listened to a series of lectures on the spiritual brain, and the long and the short of that is that there are mental structures in our brain that are receptive to and function in a spiritual realm. We're sensitive to something beyond ourselves. When folks are praying and doing that sort of thing, a certain area of the brain lights up that doesn't light up when we're doing other functions. And so they've taken science, it doesn't prove there's a God, but it proves that human beings have a spiritual quality in our nature that resides or functions, has a structure in the brain that lights up or operates when we're in that mode and makes us receptive to spiritual things outside of ourselves. So, anyway, so that's the ontological responsibility. So if something exists beyond us, we're responsible to have relationship with that. So that's what Rabbi Sachs is saying. Now, this family tree that we've got is kind of confusing. Again, I know most of us, when we're looking in the Bible and reading the stories, we want to get to things we can understand. And these names and the begats and all of that are things we want to skim through. But if we stop and pay a little closer attention, then we see things that are there. The father of Abram, Terah, was 70 when he becomes father to Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Just in that statement, does that raise questions? Well, I had one. In that year, he becomes father to 3. Are the 3 triplets? Or are they children of 3 different mothers? Doesn't say. It's just out there. So he's 70, has 3 kids. Now, one thing we know is that in these genealogies, the dates and the longevity and stuff are exaggerated. They're different. Well, they're not things that are real precise that we can have a lot of confidence that they're historically accurate. So the 70 probably has more to do with something else, and that he had 3 sons, and they're not going to bother with saying, well, actually he was 69 when one was born, and 72 when the second was born, and 75 when the third one was born. He was needed to have that number 70 in there, and needed to say that he had 3 sons, so had 3 sons. But anyway, it raises a question: who are the mothers, or who is the mother? It leaves that kind of open. Now, Haran, one of the sons, brother to Abram, dies in Ur, having had 1 son, Lot. So Lot becomes orphaned, and he's either being raised by Terah or raised by Abraham, or Abram takes him in to raise him. It doesn't say. He just stays in this family clan. And, later when God says to Abram, leave your father's house, well, they're all kind of under one big tent or in one home setting, a big extended family. So Terah has 3 sons. One was Haran, and he has Lot, the boy, and Milcah, a girl, and Issachar, I think, is another girl. And that's unusual because most of these just name the males, but now we're getting the females in there. So Haran has Lot, Milcah, and Issachar. And from Lot later come the tribes of Moab and Ammon. So there's historical reasons why we've got to have him play a significant role here. But Terah's other son, Nahor, seems to take his niece Milcah for wife, and has a son, Bethuel, who has a daughter, Rebekah, who Isaac, Abraham and Sarah's kid, later marries. And Rebekah had a brother, Laban, who had 2 daughters, Leah and Rachel, who become wives to cousin Jacob, Isaac's son. So we've got a term called endogamy. That's marriage and procreation within a close-knit group. In some cultures and tribes, you have to go off and find someone in other tribes and other groups and so forth. But in Joshua 24:2, when we get to the theme of the story, when Abram and Sarai go down to Egypt, and then when they're in the area of Melchizedek, that Abram is afraid Sarah is so beautiful that the king is going to kill him and take her for wife, and so he says, she's my sister. And we'll get to this later, but at that place, they seem to be trying to clean it up that he's not lying, that really she is his sister, because in Joshua 24:2, In Genesis 20:12, Abram says, Sarai is his half-sister, daughter of Terah, but a different mother. Y'all remember that? Well, these little details are usually not brought out in Sunday school among the kids, and often they're somewhat difficult to preach on as text for the Sunday morning sermon, but these little verses are in there. So, in Joshua 24:2, we have the verse says, "In times past, your fathers down to Terah, father of Abram and Nahor," they leave out Haran because he was dead, I guess, "dwelt beyond the river and served other gods." Dwelt beyond the river and served other gods. And the biblical scholars and historians think the other gods are probably primarily a moon god. Different ones of the commentaries I was reading would make that point. Only Vater went into detail to try to explain that background. And it's probably a moon god, Sin, which is a Sumerian name meaning a knowing Lord, also called a Nanar, man in heaven, or, as we would say, the man in the moon. So it's kind of curious. We have little kids, and we go out and we look at a full moon, and we say, "Look, can you see the man in the moon?" Well, if you're seeing that image that looks like a man, and you're a very primitive society, and you think, well, that's the God. We can see the God. And if that God is up there in the moon, then that God is watching over us and can see everything. So it's an all-knowing God up there. And then the word for Sarai can be translated queen. Milcah can be princess. Also Iscah could be princess. So these words are pretty common. I mean, within families, little girls are often daddy's princess. May not be her given name, but that's what she's called sometimes. But anyway, all of this is to say that with these names and people, we do have some historical connections. It's not just made up. We've got historical connections with real people and places, even though not precisely accurate. But anyway, the Ur and Haran were significant cities on trade routes in the ancient world. However, there's debates about which Ur would it be. There's a southern Ur and a northern Ur, and scholars debate which one that would be. But Ur and Haran were trade cities, and a lot went on in the trade routes. Now that places the beginnings with a relatively defined era of time around the third millennia, but some argue, as early as 1400 before the Common Era. But there's Western Semitic empires that have culture and influence. They have found some ancient clay tablets showing the names like Eber, Abraham, Ishmael, Israel, and Esau, and a city Elba, or a deity Elba, invoked with the name Yah, like our Yahweh. So there's a lot of things that from way, way, way back have kind of worked their way through the tradition and are still held in these stories. There were questions, and we see as we read through the story of Abraham and these moves around, what social class were they, Terah and Abraham? We often have the idea with their migrating, and then later in movies and so forth, pick up that they are a pastoral and a mobile kind of shepherding, smaller group. A modest figure is Abraham in those visions, leading his flocks to the best pasture land and pitching his tent there. Shechem and Bethel and Ai were hill country of Palestine with good water resources. But the P resources really are showing Abram and Lot as more like Oriental potentates. They're rich in slaves and other possessions. They're rulers over much material and personal wealth and domains, which implies city dwellers, settled. I mean, you can't have all of these slaves and servants and this big bunch of folks and be real nomadic, hunting for food all the time. It really implies a much more settled, structured social order. But regardless, so anyway, we've got two traditions that are giving us different messages and implications of who they were and what their lifestyle was. But regardless of the traditions from which the J, P, E, D, and R for redactor, they drew these pieces from various real elements and people and places and times, and they want to make different points. Von Rad, one of the oldest and most reliable sources, summarizes that the divine command in the beginning, let there be, then this divine command changes and comes here, and the Lord says to Abram, go. It's still God is working and in control directly, and then God takes another path and wants to work in cooperation with, in partnership, and direct the path a little more closely. So, go to the land that I will show you. And Abram, or Israel, is taken from this community of nations, and the reasons for the genealogies and lists of the nations, again, was to show that among all these nations and all these people, God chose this particular group. God chose this particular group. And then why? Why them? And it's curious, and we struggle with that. But we have in Deuteronomy the verse 26:5, a wandering Aramean was my father. So this understanding goes all the way back to Abram, and that this was a person without any empire or great power that God chose. Spicer says Abraham's journey to the Promised Land is not a routine expedition of several hundred miles, but an epic voyage in search of spiritual truths, not just land and a name, but spiritual truths, a quest which constitutes the central themes of biblical history. This whole idea of go forth and trust me as you go forth into the unknown. And that's kind of a life quest, not just geographical. When you send your children off to college or career or newly married, go forth into the unknown. We hope and pray all will be well, but you've heard about boomerang kids. Anyway, the call to be part of something new, a new beginning for humanity, a new approach that God is using for the salvation of creation. This call comes to Abram. And as we said earlier, the cult worship in this place of Ur and Haran was this moon worship. At least it was not a fully developed Jewish faith, which all the terms and practices and history had been developed. This was very early. So the God that Abram hears, he really doesn't know who this is. I mean, it's not like our kids who grow up in the church and may be at a special youth camp or, Christmas Eve service or something when, and you remember Muzan used to tell the story of the revival in his church where he felt the call. Well, there are those structures that have existed for hundreds and thousands of years that young folks kind of understand some level of who this God is. But Abram at this point didn't have any of that structure, didn't have any of that tradition. And so this is just a strange call that he doesn't know who it is or where it's coming from exactly. So, but the call is to leave your former attachments and security. If we go with the city, and they have some degree of wealth, because it says, and they took their possessions and their people, that they were established in a city. So there's a big social structure and security there that he's told to just leave it. And go from your father's house and go into the unknown, to uncertain place and future. Now, he takes Lot. Now, was that disobedience? He's supposed to leave his family, but then he takes Lot. Could be either way. Taking Lot could be construed as disobedience. However, as I mentioned earlier, Lot is needed in the story as it evolves. So we need that character in the story. He's got to be there for those other parts of the story. So this could be thought of as, if he's grown up and pretty healthy and strong, going off into the unknown, here's one more able-bodied male to fight off any dangerous animals or robbers, attackers, or whatever. It's an extra security and not fully trusting God, and therefore a little disobedient. On the other hand, he may be more of a liability if he's younger, if he's a teenager, he's impulsive, he doesn't want to listen to directions, and he's another mouth to feed. But when Terah dies, leaving Abram as the head of the house, as the household, as the oldest son, then the orphan Lot is either still Abram's responsibility if he kind of took him under his wing earlier, or he kind of inherits that responsibility when his dad dies, if he was the one who was mainly looking after Lot. So Abram could be fulfilling a moral responsibility to continue his care for Lot. He wasn't going to abandon him when he left. He would take him along to continue that relationship of care and guidance. So that one's could go either way. And it's interesting, the commentary, this is something I find all the time, that through my years of ministry, I'll see something and I'll wonder about it, and there's not one commentator that I can find that deals with it. And so I'm left with this big unanswered question. What is it? And anyway, but there's a radical break with all kinds of structure of support. There's the religious support, whatever they were doing or had to be somewhat influenced by the dominant culture, just like we've got today. I'm not sure it's religious, but, this whole big argument around here about the Christmas parade or the holiday parade or, these kinds of things, that the dominant culture structures how we experience things in life. And Christianity has been a dominant culture. So a lot of folks are uncomfortable with that. I'm not sure what Santa Claus riding on a float has to do with the Christian Christmas celebration. That's a cultural kind of thing. But still, it's connected and raises the questions. But the point of all that is Abram grew up in a culture that had all of these symbols and thought forms and ideas and customs and celebrations surrounding him. And so he had that as a part of it, and it gave order to their world. But he's leaving that. Whether he believed in it or not, he's leaving that. And then the economic and social structures that were present. We're believing that was a trade center, and so a lot of economic activity going on. And then the land. He had to leave the familiar parts of the land he knew of. Now, one of the things in that time, it was really pretty precarious because you had hoarding armies moving across and attacking, and people saying that they wanted that stuff, and if they were, might made right, if they want it, they take it if they're big enough and strong enough. So there's strength in numbers. When people gathered in their communities, they supported one another and protected one another, either organized by some powerful leader who said, I'll protect you if you serve in my army. And, this is we work together on this. But anyway, to break away from that is risky. It's dangerous. There are no strength in numbers. You're a small group, and whoever's marauding out there, you're easy pickings. And then the break with the familiar and the known, water, food, climate, seasons, safety and dangers. You just have to be on edge all the time because you don't know what you can trust. You haven't experienced it yet. So using Sachs' developmental theory for the mental development of humanity, the developmental theory in regard to Abram and his own spiritual and moral development, we see him making a big leap. First of all, but we see the ages and dates are not literal and they're symbolic. But all we know is that Abram and Nahor and Haran had grown up and matured, and they married, and Nahor and Haran had fathered children. Haran and Terah had died. Abram is the oldest son, now childless. In today's terms, with Terah dying, Abram has a midlife crisis or adjustment. Before, this powerful and wealthy Terah was in control of things, ordered things, took care of things. Abram was still under his tent, still in his house. Now Terah dies. His brother has died. He's had to face death and mortality. And when that happens, it makes you ask the questions about life and its meaning and who am I? And so now he is the head of this clan. Before he was just the oldest son. But now he inherits the responsibility. And he may inherit the title. But yet he has no children. So if he's thinking of posterity and legacy, he's got some issues with which to question and struggle. These questions face all of us at different times in our lives where we have to kind of step back and wonder about our purpose, our meaning. We know that at least the news media picks up on it when a president gets past halfway in the term of service, they start talking about what legacy will he leave, and that he's concerned about his legacy of his years in office. Well, I think that's partly true of all of us. What difference does my life make? Is there anything valuable that I've contributed to the life of the world or to my family? Have I made any difference? Have I just been a taker and a user but never given and left anything that's significant? How am I going to be remembered? Are people going to remember me kindly and say good things about me? We've got, I know, sometimes after a funeral service that I've led for one of our saints who's done wonderful things, occasionally someone will come out and say, I don't know what I'm going to do when my time comes. You're not going to have anything to say about me. This person did so much. I don't have anything. What am I going to do? So my answer is, get to work. there's lots of things you can do yet. You've got lots of life in you. Look for some good projects where you can make that contribution, that gift. So Abram is if we just look at the psychological part of him as a human being and these life situations having happened, he could very easily be in kind of a midlife crisis kind of spiritual and emotional state. And in that spiritual and emotional state, he's very open and approachable by God. The divine Spirit of God can be receptive in his heart and soul. It's fertile soil, if you will, in which God can plant some seeds. Now, whether it's a voice making a noise, sound vibrations like wherever the speakers are. Anybody know where they are? I don't know where they are. They're just somewhere hidden. But anyway, the vibrations of sound that come to the eardrum and make it vibrate. Was it that kind of voice, or was it a voice in his mind, in his head, that was moving and directing his thoughts and his feelings? So no way to prove that one way or another, but we know the scriptural tradition speaks of dreams and visions and so forth, and that they come from God. Whether God flips a switch and turns on a projector that shines a picture on a wall, or just puts that image in a person's mind, doesn't matter as long as that person gets it and receives it and understands where it came from and what it's calling him or her to do and where to go. But it raises this question about the call. When and where and how does God call persons into service? And this is why this story is here, because it's supposed to make all of us ask ourselves in our life's journey, is God calling me or you to do something special or to be something special for God? And it doesn't have to be earth-shattering like this, because Abram was just really not that spectacular a person. He was open, he was receptive at his life, and then God works with him, and he grows and develops, as we will see as it goes. But I remember reading a textbook in sociology way back when, and it was about great leaders, and it was raising the question of leadership in history of the influential people, and it was asking the question, it's a theoretical question, pondering whether certain people are born with leadership qualities and gifts, ambition and drive and heart, so that it does not matter when or where they are born, they will become a strong leader. And then the other side is, or could it be that the circumstances, the place, the times will create and stimulate within some normal person and bring out of them the qualities of leadership, and there will be something inspires or motivates them to come out from the average run-of-the-mill and step forward. Whom shall I send? Well, I'll try. Which is it? I remember Winston Churchill was one that was argued for this latter, because, he didn't have lots of great leadership abilities, but he had lots of liabilities, and he wasn't all that well respected. But when the time came, this wonderful quality of leadership came forth from him. But if it weren't for wartime, we never would have seen it. Never would have happened, was the argument. He would have been kind of an average kind of guy. He would have been in some leadership positions and did some things, but he wouldn't have had that greatness and significance if it hadn't have been the circumstances that lifted him into that. Well, the point of which makes me ask, how much was it Abram's innate qualities and disposition and emotional and spiritual and intellectual qualities that God was looking around all around the world and just waiting until found one. Now I'm going to act. Or was it, as God's looking around the world, the conditions in the world are now right for me to act? And it could have been any one of a number of people that God chooses. It doesn't matter, because who's the primary actor here? It's God. All you have to do is follow me. When I say go, go, and I'll be with you. I'll show you the way. Well, in the Methodist Church, we have this process of people interested in going into ministry that we look at two things. One is the call, and try to question and have people examine, what was the nature of that call? Tell me about the call. Art McGrew has this joke, a silly story, that there's a preacher that had seen two letters, PC, in the clouds. And he was sure it was God calling him, preach Christ. And so he went into the ministry. You heard this story? He went into the ministry, and he was a total failure. And finally someone asked him about, why did you think you were called? And they said, because of this vision of the PC. I just meant plant corn. It just meant plant corn. So in interviewing, we try to help people explore that call. Is that a call? And not for us to judge whether it is or not, but help them examine, because a person has to really feel it within themselves. I remember when I was in ninth grade, I felt called, and so I was introduced to the district superintendent, and I told that I felt a call. And you think lots of people, a young person, oh, that's wonderful, pat me on the head, that's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. He looked me very seriously in the eye and said, if you can do anything else, go do it. Now, was that being mean? No, it's very serious and important, because if you're truly called, there's not something else that you can go do. This has a hold of you. But the other part is the gifts and graces, that a person may be called by God, but it may not be into the ministry as a preacher, pastor. They may not have the gifts and graces for that kind of ministry, but it doesn't mean they're not called by God to be God's minister in some way. They have to discern and find exactly what that call is, but the response is to go, step out, and begin the journey. And God will show you the way through different people and different experiences and so forth, and your continued praying about that question and issue. So, how much of this is a process of Abram having these special gifts and qualities that do eventually come out through the years, and how much is God really shaping him, molding him, helping him grow into that role that he will fulfill. So we've got about 3 minutes before I start on something else that I can't finish. Comments, questions? Yes, sir.
Being called to preach was one of the most dramatic experiences I ever had in my life.
Mm-hmm.
As a result, I felt a real interest in how people were called to preach. And I used to frequently ask people, I don't think I ever did you, how were you called to preach?
Well, you may not have needed to. We had this little booklet back early in my ministry where we all had to write our stories, and it was published. So
I got a lot of different interesting answers to that question.
Can you all hear the? Yeah, okay.
One of the most memorable was from a Church of Christ preacher, and he said, "I simply saw the need and responded to it." I quit asking that question of ministers that I knew because I asked a disciples preacher one time, and he thought that I was inferring that he wasn't really called to preach.
Oh, yeah. That could be taken instead of, tell me about your calling, as what makes you think you're called?
Yeah, but it's an interesting study to do that. And the old Assembly of God preachers that I grew up would do something similar to what you were talking about a moment ago. If a young person came to them and said they were called to preach, they would discourage them, sometimes actually ridicule them, and that advice, if there's anything else you can do and be happy to do it, was frequent. But the theory was that if you were really called to preach, you couldn't be discouraged.
Yeah,
well, be discouraged, but you would walk past the discouragement and go ahead.
Right, and a part of that is you've got to learn to process criticism in a healthy way in order to grow. Because whenever you start out at anything, you're green, you're a beginner, you're a novice. And if you're going to become, you've got to grow, and you've got to overcome weaknesses and liabilities and mistakes and so forth. And if you can't receive the criticism in a healthy way, then you turn inward and you don't grow, and it's not good.
I had a lady one time remind me that he knew.
Okay.
He told me if God calls you to do something, He will enable you to do it. If it's truly God's call for you to do it, He will enable you to do it.
And if you go out there and fail, it just helps you learn that wasn't God. That was my own ambition, or yes, we have a word in the church that we use to try to sort that out, and that's called discernment. Discernment of whether it's God or my own ego or something else. So let's end with a prayer, and we'll go do more important things in the next hour. Dear God, we thank you for never giving up on us human beings, that you try and try and try again to help us learn and help us grow and help us find out who we are, that we are yours, but we are called to be special people in the midst of the world, reaching out to others and showing the way to you, so that all persons will come to know that they are loved and have a significant and important purpose in the grand scheme of things. In Christ's name, amen.